My name is Maitree, and as one of the Symposium volunteers, it is my pleasure to introduce Nick van der Meulen today. Nick is a research scientist with MIT CISR, and before which he served as a faculty member at Rotterdam School of Management as well as University of Amsterdam. His research is focused on digital business transformations, and he's going to lead the panel today on managing organizational explosions during digital transformation. Please welcome Nick.
All right. Thank you, Maitree, and good afternoon, everyone. I hope that many of you were here just now to hear about the insights from the award finalists. I thought it was a very engaging discussion on how to lead digital transformation. I thought we can just continue this conversation by talking about organizational explosions. Now, I can't just drop a word like that without clarifying it any further. So allow me to introduce a framework that my colleagues, Peter Weil, Stephanie Werner, who is here, and I, that we've developed at the MIT Sloan Center for Information Systems Research. Over the past 3.5, 4 years, with the help of our sponsors and patrons, we have collected data of over 800 organizations. We've conducted dozens of interviews and done case studies with organizations on digital business transformation. And these transformations mean that you have to radically think about your capabilities on 2 dimensions. On the one hand, you have to improve your capabilities on the dimension of operational efficiency. On the other hand, you have to look at your customer experience. And if you manage to do both, then you become what we like to call future ready. So that means that you gain value. On the one hand, removing costs, simplifying, your CapEx, OpEx, your cost-income ratio, what have you, goes down. And on the other hand, you create value by innovating, improving customer journeys. But in order to do that, you have to be modular and agile. Because if you innovate but make your operations more complex, you don't get the value. We also see that future-ready organizations use data as a strategic asset, as many of you hopefully have heard this morning during Barb Wixom's panel. And it also means that you have to partner so that you can either drive or pick, plug, and play as modular producers in an ecosystem. So you want to be future ready. Unfortunately, most of us are not. We're stuck in what we like to call silos and spaghetti. We have a lot of experience, but also legacy of systems, of processes, of habits, of data, and all of that complexity makes it really hard for our employees to do their very best work. If we see good performance in this quadrant, it's typically through the heroics of our people, and that's just not sustainable. So the question becomes, how do we get from silos and spaghetti to future ready? There's a couple of ways we can go. We can work on fixing the complexity first. We can go all in on customer experience and fix all of that complexity later. We can try to address both in iterative steps, or just give up and say we can't change in time, and we're going to create a future-ready organization by design, typically a spin-off or a subsidiary. Now, all 4 pathways are viable. If we look at financial performance, net margins, revenue growth, but we also know that on all 4 pathways, you will encounter what we like to call organizational explosions. And they are significant disruptive changes that you will have to make if you want to make progress on your digital transformation. And they affect your employees, your customers, your business partners, and there are 4 categories. First, there's the decision rights that have to change. You'll have to rethink the people that make key decisions and are held accountable for decision domains. The most important challenge that we see is getting the right people to lead key areas. Business rules will have to change, incentives. People that had a lot of power before, who owned individual products, owned budgets, they will have to lose some of that power in favor of integrated digital offerings. There's also new ways of working that are being introduced. We heard about it just now in the previous session. More agile ways of working, evidence-based, test and learn. We have to focus on the employee experience. changing the culture is very hard. It's a very ephemeral concept. So changing the collective work habits, how do you do that? Massive explosion. You'll also have to do some organizational surgery. Some restructuring or reorganization is typically required to make progress on your transformation journey. You have to get rid of the silos if you want to remove organizational complexity. We see typically a move towards flatter organizations, reimagining reporting lines, job functions. And finally, you have to work towards creating a platform mindset. How are you going to create this platform that takes the capabilities that make your organization great, and how are you going to offer that as a digital service? So 4 explosions, and they will come at you differently depending on which transformation pathway you are on, but you will have to deal with all of them. And the important thing then becomes, how are we going to control these explosions so that they don't wreck our companies altogether, but rather help us to gain our transformational goals. And here to talk about that, we have 4 great panelists. I'm very happy that you're all here. I'll be taking questions from the audience as we go through Slido. Of course, I also have many questions for you. Just by ways of introduction, let's go across the stage. Just some quick introductions. And to get us started, please share with the audience what would be the one thing that you would like the audience to understand about your company, and also the transformation that you're on. What does future ready mean for you? Paul, let's start with you.
I'm Paul Gaffney. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Dick's Sporting Goods. Hopefully all of you are customers. I've been at Dick's for about 1.5 years. Prior to Dick's, I spent just under 4 years at Home Depot. I've sold something to you from one of those categories over the past 5 years. And it's interesting that today we've talked a lot about technology, and we've talked a lot about the folks that we all interact with a lot, and those are usually folks at headquarters. I think the one thing that has been an interesting thread today, it showed up in the Chromecast discussion, it showed up in this past panel, it's actually been the thing that I've found is most important. If anything that we do isn't actually in service of the front line, the humans who actually interact with other humans, that prevents, in a way, from truly being future ready. That's where the business of the company really happens, in those moments of truth between a frontline associate and the customer that they're dealing with. And I think, to me, that's become the true lens of future ready, is have you really given the decision-making power to those moments of truth between customers and frontline associates. And when you've done that, you're truly future ready. When you still think you have other more important constituencies, I think you're still trending back toward eating spaghetti in silos.
All right, definitely. We're going to get back to that in a bit in terms of decision rights. Leanne.
Good afternoon. Leanne Murray. I'm the Global CIO for Wealth and Asset Management at Manulife. Manulife is a leading financial organization providing financial advice in insurance, wealth and asset management, and I spoke about insurance as well, but been around since the late 1800s. So when you think about silo and spaghetti, that probably comes to mind. But when you think about the mission statement at Manulife, it's decisions made easier, customer lives made better. So if we achieve that, I think we've moved away from the silo and the spaghetti to a company of the future.
All right, excellent. Great.
Good afternoon, everyone. Craig Stevenson with Korn Ferry. This month actually marks my 25th year at the firm, so when you mentioned 1800 and something for Manulife, I got a little nervous for a second, but not here to talk about the transformation underway at Korn Ferry. So yes, while we are undergoing a transformation, I'm here to talk about what we're doing with the industry as the largest human capital advisory firm in the world to help leaders prepare for being future ready. So it's about adapting to environments, all the thousands of people that we've assessed. There are key themes. There's themes around anticipating. There's themes around driving. There's things and evidence around the acceleration of those efforts. And then moving towards partnership. This is not easy, by the way, guys. And then moving towards partnership and then obviously trusting the team. I need to have the internal purpose as well as the external focus. So that's the perspective I'm here to bring today.
Excellent, thank you.
Good afternoon again, everyone. Anyone new in this room? So, you guys heard my introduction before. So, Eash, Sundaram, proud JetBlue crew member, Chief Digital Technology Officer for JetBlue. And the functions I manage within JetBlue is our digital commerce, digital experience, technology, and our venture capital.
Excellent, thank you, Eash. You already each mentioned several of the organizational explosions. Paul, you immediately mentioned the decision rights, especially towards the front line. And what we've seen in our research is that it typically starts these transformational journeys with reimagining the decision rights. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? It's like, how do you get people to focus on your organizational goals rather than their own individual?
I think it's a great question, and before talking to you about your research, I hadn't thought about it in the context of decision rights. I had thought about it in terms of who decides what we work on, and framing it as decision rights is interesting. I've encountered a lot of folks in headquarters organizations who, for a whole variety of reasons, some anthropological, some psychological, believe that they have come to a place in their career where it was finally their turn to decide what gets done. And unfortunately, there's this generation now where that's happening simultaneously with the world of software making it clear that no one actually gets to decide anything other than the customer. And companies that react to that, and companies that actually honor the customer's decision making, that's really the creation of this tension. The marketplace has given the customer the decision-making rights, but it sometimes gets set up as this technology transformation or this agile transformation is the thing challenging these headquarters decision rights. What's been helpful to me is, and I've had the luxury for about 6 years now of being in 2 companies where the customer is very important. When we can bring the customer into the room, and when we can bring the frontline associate into the room and get people to understand the importance of honoring them, that's been a productive method of sort of shifting these decision rights. But it's not any kind of universal vaccine. There is a great history. I know this in particular in retail. I've spent a lot of my career in retail. I suspect, though, that you've all seen this. There's a lot of systems in the hands of frontline associates that weren't built for them, but they were inflicted on them by someone at headquarters. And it's somewhat violent language, but when you spend a lot of time with the frontline associates, that's actually how they feel. And then because the accumulation of these systems that have been inflicted on them were never designed to work together, headquarters has basically exported an integration problem to those frontline associates. The really powerful thing is when you can undo that, you make those people really, really happy. And at many companies, there are just a lot more human beings in the front line and on the front line than there are at headquarters, so your sort of human happiness delivery goes up pretty immediately.
Exactly. Anyone like to?
No, that's so true, right? When you think about the last 30 years of technological evolution, simplicity was never the word that was used to address, whether it's customer experience or frontline crew member experience. It was all about what technology folks wanted to give them. And we thought the more complexity you add, it's really cool. But now the world is changing, and brands like Apple and Uber and Amazon have had a significant impact providing that simplicity. And we all need to learn from that simplicity and make it more personal for our frontline crew members first before we think about customers, because they're the ones who are delivering this experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, so I have a different turn on that. I service internal customers, and one of the things that I'm striving for is scale and simplicity in a global organization. And to your point, Paul, where you talked about decisions and systems were inflicted, we get a lot of that when you're global, in the center, going out to the regions. And one of the things that we've been, trying really hard is to jointly empower the teams, not just in the home office, but in the regional offices, to better understand what are the local needs versus the global needs. And there is a level of empathy that is needed when you're making these decisions so you have a broader understanding, because I don't believe in any company it's a one-size-fits-all mentality. Right. That's where we lose the opportunity to increase engagement if we're doing things to other areas in the company. So we've been able to kind of build momentum in the transformation journey by bringing people in up front and not having it as a surprise.
And then just to add to that briefly, what's fascinating is just from the lens in which we kind of look at the marketplace, and that's across 5 vertical markets. So that's industrial, technology, healthcare, consumer, and financial services. We've certainly seen some fads over the years and kind of these quote-unquote explosions. I don't think we've ever seen anything like we're seeing right now. And what's so just amazing is sitting across from a Fortune 10 company to a Fortune 5,000 company, everyone's having the same challenge. And everyone's having the same challenge at a different pace, at a different complexity point, at a different customer. Are you B2B? Are you B2C? Every situation that we're encountering right now has a high level of uniqueness, and I'm not sure we'll ever see another time like we have in front of us right now.
Mm-hmm. So one of the interesting things for me is we have these different transformation pathways. Right? And if we look at leading, what it takes as a leader, what kind of profile we're looking for, and perhaps Craig, you can answer that. It probably does make a big difference to lead. For instance, take JetBlue Ventures, right? Sort of a new unit that is more future-ready by design, leading that type of entity versus the silos and spaghetti. 132, I think, at Manulife, year-old organization, getting that. So what do you see in terms of what it takes from a profile of a leader in these situations?
So referenced it before, and I think just to reinforce it, we have done a lot of research, and the future leader is going to be very different than the historic leader. And so we've actually developed an acronym that we're speaking with our clients about. The first A is, being prepared for anticipating the future, being forward-thinking, forward-leaning, seeking input from others, and being willing to disrupt a little bit your own enterprise and challenge the status quo. Historically, we haven't run things that way. And so as we look at the D, that's around drive, that's around strong execution, that's around delivery, that's around making sure you're accomplishing what you're setting out to achieve. And then accelerating. Once you start driving, you accelerate. And it's about having good people on the team with mission and purpose focused on a common goal. And then you start looking at, beyond that, the partnering, which has been a big theme today. And that's really uncomfortable for some organizations, and it's going to have to happen more and more. Speaking with a couple of colleagues earlier during lunch, and it's something that we're doing for the first time as an organization, where historically we've owned all the IP. And so it's just interesting to see how things evolve. And then T, to finish up the ADAPT acronym, is around trust. And that's about creating the mission and the purpose within your team and having diverse views and input from across an organization. So the future leader is going to be able to excel at that. And historically, the leader has not, where it's been much more hierarchical, top-down, et cetera. But would certainly appreciate other thoughts on that topic.
I've found, and that's a really helpful framework. I think that colors in a lot of interesting things. And I don't know if this is subsumed by that. But I've also found in trying to get a whole leadership team to be effective, the folks, regardless of the journey, who end up being the most effective are the ones who become less concerned with them being right. Mm-hmm. And that's really the frame of mind that gets people, if you can be driven and recognize that you're going to be wrong a lot, you tend to implement practices and approaches that take small, incremental, de-risked steps. If you're committed to being right, and if you believe that you have the answers, you spend a lot of time trying to make your future come true, mm-hmm. whether or not the evidence is supporting you, and you kind of ignore feedback along the way because you're determined to make this thing happen. That actually used to work for people as a model. It led to silos and spaghetti. Those silos were someone's idea that needed to get done, and those leaders led by dates and budgets, not by happy humans. I think that's become a fundamental change.
Totally agree. And just to that point, 5 years ago, 41% of CTOs were reporting to CEOs. That number today is 65% within the Fortune 1000, which is a great testament towards just playing more of a strategic role, leaning in and helping on strategy, et cetera, and especially digital transformation and managing these types of explosions. That was significantly different 5 years ago. So we've been really happy to watch that momentum develop for the function.
And we've seen that reflected in titles like the Chief Digital and Technology Officer, where commerce and the IT come together, like in your case, Eash.
Yeah, it's interesting. Almost change is happening at every level in the organization, from frontline till the board, right? The pressure is building up at every stage because companies are disappearing faster than ever. New generation companies are coming in. There has to be a right balance. None of us run a brand new company like Uber. We've all had, legacy, industry challenges, and there is a current day problem we need to solve, and there is also a future state, company that we need to build. And in a startup, it's easy to do it because they solve one problem 1,000,000 times, and we solve 1,000,000 problems sometimes one time in a day, and it's different, right? So when you think about organizational explosions, we solved the current day challenges. The 5 key themes that impacted us current day was speed to market. We need to get products faster. Agile is a tool, but the fundamental thing that we need to implement is faster speed to market. Useful life of products have come down dramatically. E-commerce doesn't stay the same for 10 years. We don't do these SAP type implementations anymore. It's 3 years the best you get. Your mobile app lives for 1 year the best, right? Speed to market. The second thing is we focus on cost to deliver. When your product lives like less than a year, you can't afford to spend like $20 million anymore. You have to get it faster, cheaper. The third thing is it has to be super high quality. What Apples and the Amazons and the Home Depots and the Dick's Sporting Goods, we buy a lot. We spend quite a bit of money with you guys. Is the quality, right? It's flawless systems that they have, and you can't have glitchy systems. The fourth and the fifth is even more important: being responsive, getting these things, understanding customer needs, understanding frontline crew member needs, and being responsive. The last thing people miss is talent. You can't just get it done without the core talent. If you think about these 5 operating imperatives, your organization design fundamentally has to be different. You can't just take the siloed approach and say, like, I'm IT, he is commercial, there'll be handoffs, somebody writes business requirements, somebody gives it to someone. It just doesn't work. It takes months for you to write a business case. It takes months for people to write. So what we did in JetBlue is, we created the end-to-end experiences and functions that made sense, where we can drive these 5 things. We didn't collapse the whole company into one group, right? We picked things like our digital commerce. End-to-end experience was what mattered. There was no product handoff. We put the whole team together. We think about, the person who designs in commercial moved into technology. The person who built it moved into the one integrated function, testing, rollout, business cases. And then the measures that we used to drive results was conversions, not IT project management and things like that, which made it more meaningful for us to drive that time to market and cost to deliver and being responsive. We've seen dramatic improvements in, all these metrics, right? And, the last part I'm going to touch is talent. People love to be part of an end-to-end experience. They don't want to be handing off things. They want to take accountability and they want to own it. And that's a big change for us.
Absolutely. It's one of the questions becomes, though, how do you deal with this talent, right? If you want to offer these solutions, whether it's for crew members, employees, customers, that are so closely interwoven with your products and your experiences, do you need this talent to be internal to your organization, or can you rely on contractors, gig workers, what have you, Leanne, I know that you have outsourcing in your portfolio. What's your take?
Yeah, so we have a two-tiered approach. I think to become customer obsessed, I think the talent needs to be close to the business. I don't believe in outsourcing that because I think you'll lose the value and it will take longer, to translate the requirements in that. And then for anything that's, your standard testing or upgrades, I think that is where we're going from an outsource. But kind of the key value proposition that's going to deliver and drive revenue for the business, I believe it needs to be close to the business and co-located. That's where we've seen the best results. When teams are distributed, you need a very niche skill set. They have to have, knowledge of the business. They have to be technically astute, et cetera, and know the end-to-end process to what Eash was speaking to. So, it's a two-tiered approach, but to be customer obsessed, I think we need to be close to the customer, to the business.
Well, I know that you will probably have a take on this as well.
I think another essential ingredient of leadership is to have beliefs and then to constantly revisit them. So my current belief, which I'm constantly revisiting, is actually mostly aligned. I do believe that, and I've undone 2 very large outsourcing arrangements and have watched a lot of others do the same thing over the past 5 or 6 years. So I do believe that folks have to be on the same team. I believe Toyota taught us back in the 70s that when folks start together, things get better. So that goes to the handoffs. And absolutely, I have lots of evidence about the power of co-location, which is at tension with some of the workforce trends. And the power of co-location, just a quick anecdote. We've tried, both at the Home Depot and now at Dick's, to have teams that have this balance between folks whose primary responsibility is to make sure that the thing they're working on has economic health. A lot of people call that role product management. Folks whose primary role is to make sure that the folks who are using the software are going to love it. A lot of folks call that design. And then people who will make sure that the stuff works. And a lot of folks call that engineering. And when those folks are all together, when they're all on the same team, when they're all getting their paycheck from the same folks and are somewhat animated by the fundamental mission of the same company, and they're all in the same place, I've seen that is the highest probability of the best results. We had one team that was really, really impactful. You folks have used the app that this team has made. It's Forrester's #1 app in retail right now, but they were segmented. The product management folks were in Atlanta, and the engineering folks were in Dallas. They decided themselves to just go camp out in Dallas for a week and live and work together. And in the retrospective that they did at the end of that week, they said, my God, we got more done in this 1 week than we usually get done in 8 weeks. And I asked them why'd they stop. And then you get the real human things about, well, they have lives. And so I think we all have this challenge of balancing. I think there's a lot of evidence that when they are your own employees, when they're all together, when they're all able to start together, and when they hang out in the same place, the probability of success is higher. You can't always pull that off. So you have to do some other things to handicap the fact that you're now lowering your probability of success by dealing with reality.
There's definitely trade-offs.
This is a talent market, right? If we all think we're going to hire everyone and keep them in our buildings, I don't think it's going to work. We have, the only thing that differentiates our partners to us is who cuts the paycheck. Fundamentally, that's the difference. We go behind talent. We have development shops and technology shops in Krakow, Poland, Dublin. Krakow has the largest amount of PhDs in one single city. So we go for operations research type work in Krakow. We go to India for other things, but we never thought, outsourcing, we always co-source. We spend the same amount of time between different centers, whether it's your own people. This is a people business. Fundamentally, everybody wants to be treated well. They wanted to be treated right, and they wanted to be rewarded and recognized, right? And oftentimes people mix, who cuts the paycheck versus, who actually runs the shop. End of the day, whatever goes wrong or right, the buck stops in our offices, right? Who does it behind the scene really doesn't come in the front.
Right.
One of the challenges is if you have people that are outside of your organization, or at least what we found in our research, is that people that come in as contractors, I'm going to put it in very basic terms, they feel like they're second-rate workers, right? They don't have the same access to systems. They feel like they have a very different employee experience than people that are internal to the organization. So how do you address that? How do you make sure that these people can do their very best work and feel like, in your case, they are part of JetBlue, for instance?
And I go back with this, like we hire people from Microsoft, Dell, and Google, and everyone, right? They're an extension of us, and they have great cultures. It's not like companies we go doesn't have the culture that we want to share. It's really coming down to a few things, right? Do you recognize people? Do you reward people? Do you treat them well? That's the bottom line, right? And I find it fascinating. When we have an irregular operation, it doesn't matter what badge you wear. They do the same things. Mm-hmm. I've seen people, when our consultants fly our planes, they want to wear the blue gloves and clean the plane as much as I want to do it. And they take pride in doing these things. And I don't see a difference in our partners versus us. Are there bad people? We have bad people within us, right? That the badge or the payroll doesn't differentiate who you are.
Mm-hmm. The other thing I would just add on this topic, it's less about using third parties per se, but I do think we're seeing what is an amazing amount of movement right now with operating models. And it's making some things perhaps more strategic upon where those pain points might be today versus where they may have been a couple of years ago. We've seen a lot of maturity across across industries in terms of the technology function over the years. But I would say, if I could prepare this team for one thing going forward, collectively we can all share a couple of insights. I think one is to be very mindful of your operating model because it's going to change every 12 months going forward, and you have to get comfortable with that real soon. And the sooner you get more comfortable with it, the sooner you can start determining where third parties and others can actually help you. Maybe the strategic assets stay closer to the organization. Maybe some less strategic assets you can leverage others as appropriate. But that's clearly a trend that we're seeing right now.
All right, Greg,
I want to share a story. I was in your store this weekend, and I'm not a sports guy. I spend a lot of money on sports for my kids. My son wanted a soccer ball, and one of your associates, I don't even know who he works for, spent 30 minutes explaining the product. It really, my son came back so happy saying,
that's fantastic.
Somebody listened to him, somebody explained the product. It could be as simple as that, right? That makes the difference. Honestly, I don't know if you outsource your warehouse people and office people or not.
We don't.
We don't, so. No.
But I think to your fundamental point, we've invested quite heavily in getting everyone emotionally animated around delivering confidence and excitement. And I'm really happy to hear we did it in that case, and sometimes it involves that willingness. And what technology does, and we can't ask people to deliver confidence and excitement when we force them to use tools all day that make them feel miserable about their job. So the taking away and look, I don't know if any of you have ever worked retail, there's just some misery in the customers come in and mess up the products, and we love the customers, but we'd like the products to be orderly, and so you got to take care of that stuff. And do I think that we could pull that off with folks who didn't work for us? Probably, but maybe at another stage of our maturity. We've just invested heavily in kind of landing that culture. I think maybe to a certain extent, your ability to use people who you don't directly employ depends a little bit on the depth of your culture. And the deeper your culture is and the closer it is to the one that you want, the more successful you can be at bringing others who haven't necessarily signed on to the mission. I think that's the difference between an employee and a third party. The third party has signed on to some other company's mission. If your culture is really strong and you're hiring third parties from folks who are in a service mindset to their customers, I think you can be successful with that.
I agree. I think some of it has to do with the maturity level as well, though. And so we did some work last year with a firm that will remain unnamed, but about 1,500 people in the technology function, and about 1,325 of those were actually third parties. And so everything was outsourced. And so the value of the function internally, the creation of the value from a business perspective, I mean, every way you looked at it. And so just based on where this firm is from a maturity perspective, they're probably overreacting, pendulum swinging way to the other side, and then they'll start to hit a correction point at some time. But I think just a lot of it has to do with kind of where firms are in the maturity curve.
All right, Craig, now that we have you, there's a question coming in from the audience that says, in more traditionally run organizations, what are some of the strategies to get buy-in to disrupt one's own enterprise?
Can you repeat that, please?
Yes, in more traditionally run organizations, what are strategies to get buy-in to disrupt one's own enterprise?
Great question.
That's a great question. I'll take it. Listen, I shared this, how difficult industry we live in with mergers, acquisitions, and bankruptcies. The biggest buy-in we had for our ventures was future-proofing the jobs. Like, pilots can't find another job. Like, when you have a 777 captain who makes $200, $300 an hour, the company goes bankrupt, they have a reset button. They go back to $50 an hour with another airline. That's almost every job in our industry except the support centers, right? So, should we pay more today to profit sharing versus invest in early stage startups that redefine our company? Our crew members know this is important for us. They know absolutely future-proofing JetBlue is the #1 thing we need to do. So there's the balance. We're not taking $1 billion and putting it in startups, but we do quite a bit of investment in these companies that take us into the future. Not just in startups, it's investing in your company, in your product. There has to be a balance, and as long as you can define what's in it for them, I think it's not a difficult thing.
And just to add to that as well, just, we did some work with a client last year that was interesting. It's a very conservative $150 billion bank, where the CEO had been there for about 40 plus years, and there was a leadership change due to some health reasons. And I will tell you, watching this organization pivot from, or go from 0 miles an hour to 100 miles an hour in literally about 6 months' time. They wound up bringing a gentleman in by the name of Mike Whistler at M&T Bank up in Buffalo, very conservative by nature and background. They brought in Mike Whistler from Cap One. And now they're redlining. And so, I mean, they're on their path. Mike has had more specifically to your question, Mike has had the team in California about 6 times, kind of going through these immersion courses that we've helped arrange, and, really starting to provide some evidence to the senior executive team that has been maybe a little bit more oriented internally over the years, starting to look and kind of see what disruption feels like, spending time with fintechs and so on out on the West Coast. We've got one coming up as well in the New York area forum as well. So it's just been fascinating, but it's really about the education, and sometimes it's event-driven for something like this to actually kind of start to get the organization to act differently.
Yeah, I think just to that point, to disrupt an enterprise, you got to show the team the art of possible. So, one of the things that we've started is we've been doing hackathons, and we're doing them twice a year, but we did the first one in January. We did it across 5 locations globally, and we had upwards of 250 people participate. And it was interesting. The ideas were voted on. It was kind of from the ground up. What do we solve for? What problems are we looking to solve? But we didn't do it from an internal perspective. We brought in startups because I really wanted to show that there is a place for legacy and startups coming together, and the opportunities are much bigger. And we just needed to really kind of take ourselves out of the day-to-day and look at different problems. But, there was a quote last week I heard, "Love your problem." As technologists, we tend to go to the solution. And, we got a lot of press, a lot of energy, a lot of momentum, so much so that the business wants to host another one. They want to be the main participants in the one in the fall. So I just think it sends a different message. When you think about how you move to a company of the future, we got to show people. We've got to give them, the opportunity, and also the opportunity to fail. And it's okay. And move away from the hierarchy, as we talk about, from running a company, and give people the freedom and change the culture. So I've seen benefits, and now people are starting to talk about, and they're a lot more open about new things and ideas, which I didn't see before.
And the only thing I'd add to that, because I think all of that is essential, and while you're doing that, I think then this is maybe a little more nuts and boltsy, but I do think it's, maybe this wasn't historically a CIO CTO skill, but I think increasingly is an essential CIO CTO skill. I think you have to be able to talk about what could be also in the language of the other members of the executive team. So I think you have to be willing and able to have the discussion with the CFO about, hey, this is what the income statement and balance sheet could be, right, when we do this, and here are the mechanisms by which that happens. And you have to be able and willing to have the discussion with the head of operations about, hey, here's what your labor model could be. You know, here's the shift from task to purpose that can be enabled by better tools for your front line. So, and that's, you know, not many other members of the C-suite need to speak all of the languages of all of the other members of the C-suite. And that's probably the most nuts and bolts advice I could give is letting people understand in their language why this is a good thing, enables them to speak to their teams about why it's a good thing, right?
All right. The most upvoted question at this moment is, what are strategies to break down silos within an organization? It's a tough one. I know, Leanne, you're working on creating a global technology platform.
So when you think about a platform, there's two, I look at it two ways. There's a modern platform and there's legacy. But how I like to go about looking at the platform is bring the business to the table and really break down the capabilities that they need globally, because it takes away, the legacy component. Because with legacy, people are under the impression, oh, we can't upgrade it. There's nothing we can do with it. It's slowing us down. And so one of the things that has enabled us within the last couple of years is we put a vision out there. Not everyone bought into it in the beginning, was to run a global operations and technology team to drive the business for the future capabilities and to be able to scale. And it wasn't done from a technology point of view. We really dug deep into the capabilities and to what the future tech stack would look like. And so as a result of doing that, we were able to increase scale, but also it gave us the ability to move our operating model around the world. So the majority of the operations sat in North America, and as a result of the global platform that we put in place, due to the follow the sun capabilities and the multi-currency of the platform and products, we're able to move the operations around the world. And we hadn't been able to do that before because we operated in silos. So everyone knew their own piece, and now our training is global. Our technology suite is global, and that's just one area, but it was about being co-located with the business that kicked it off, and the team and the outcome, the goal was business aligned with technology. And it wasn't technology going off for 6 months and saying, okay, we're going to build you X, and then we bring X minus Y. So it was really about the outcome, but the winning part about it was having the business at the table. And Paul, to your point, talking their language. So what is recon in Canada, US, Korea, Vietnam? We were able to build a solution that worked for all 17 countries. So it's just kind of one example.
I think this is a topic too where healthy shame is really effective. And what I mean by that is we used to, in the good old days, like 10 years ago, before Google set the expectation that everyone's search should be as good as theirs, before Apple set the expectation that every app should be as elegant as theirs, and then us as consumers hold ourselves ridiculously accountable that now every company is expected to integrate all of those best things. In the olden days, you could hide your organizational dysfunction. You could hide the fact that the org chart didn't match the way the customer thought. Now the customer regularly encounters your silos, your organizational boundaries, And for folks, and I do believe that most folks in business want their customers to be happy. And it's a real source of healthy shame to get down into the weeds and help an executive team that typically doesn't see these things, because technology organizations traditionally just are willing to wear the hair shirt of all of the legacy complexity and not feel like they've got to tell anybody. You know, when you have 42 different ways to serve up a price, your customer's gonna encounter that, and most people don't like that. But if you leave them in shameless ignorance, it's very hard to motivate for breaking down those silos if you have 16 different ways to do something. And so I think it's another sort of essential skill of a transformational technology executive to be able to be articulate about the business that you're in, not by speaking the current org chart, but by speaking what functions does the customer do. And I think I would expect that everyone up here could give a little 20-minute course on the fundamental information journey of your customers from your customer's perspective. And then after cocktail hour this afternoon, we could describe the deep dysfunction that exists in implementing all of that. But it's easy to describe a world where you would do each of those things only one coherent and customer-friendly way. But I don't think there's any effective path to the question that doesn't involve getting others to understand the current amount of fragmentation under each of those sort of fundamental customer-facing things that the company does.
And then the big question is why it takes so long.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that we're seeing right now, we're actually testing with a small handful of clients, to your point, Lean and Paul. I mean, it's a journey, right? So when you start looking across the complexity of a financial services organization, a transportation company, a consumer company, or whatever the case may be, retail, all of the challenges in those respective organizations are unique because there's different cultures embedded in each one of those. So one of the things that we're starting to work on with our clients now, early days, is to remove the silos and the spaghetti, is to start bringing together what we're kind of calling a talent factory, or some people are calling it the connected enterprise, where you start bringing people out of those silos, you put them into kind of a technology, commercial technology environment where you've got product engineering and software and everything kind of all connected at one point in time, and then you put them back into a different silo. And so at a minimum, while you're not going to break the silos, you start to bring all of that kind of ecosystem back together and working more homogeneously with a common purpose and a common mission. Then they come back out of that silo the second time, back into the talent factory, leadership development takes place, you're getting them agile, you're getting them nimble, and you put them back into another. So suddenly you're going to have a connected enterprise where those silos, it'll take time, but they will break down. So we're actually just on the very early stages now of trying to help clients deal with that.
Just to add on your point, there's absolutely pros and cons of breaking silos. Historically, silos meant to be experts, right? They knew the domain really well, deep inside. And now you're going into another area where everybody becomes a little bit of expert in everything, and now you make a product decision. The IT guys have some opinion, like the commercial has an opinion, everybody has an opinion, and it creates other conflicts when you start collaborating too much without. The one thing I learned is, helping everybody understand the broader mission, vision, and speaking the same language is important, but defining decision rights is even more important. So the right people get to make these decisions. If Eash starts making pilot's decision, that doesn't go well in my company. I have no idea how these people fly their planes, but I can definitely find tools how to make them fly better. Those are completely different responsibilities, right? I think we need to know how far we can stretch our limits and clearly understand where you want to stop, rather than saying, I'm going to stretch myself too much into this and create other challenges.
The question that ties into this is, has anyone changed the funding or budgeting process for projects or initiatives that support the transformations being discussed?
I hope this doesn't go to my CFO. He doesn't know what I'm spending anyways. He only knows after I do it. No, again, if you go back and redefine how you run your department, more focused on value versus looked at upon as a cost center or a profit center, there are things that we do for our living that neither generates revenue, or adds no value to the customer directly. infrastructure, for example, like, how do you define availability of your infrastructure? There is no tangible benefit other than you can define 10 outages. But that's not why you do this, because it's cost of doing your business. It's really like, if you can make 80% of what you spend kind of in an autopilot mode, that this is what it takes to build a great company, and then the 20% becomes the incremental discussion, it runs like a charm. If you start discussing 80% and your 20% is on autopilot, you spend all your time building business cases. We're so fortunate. We have a very small team. We're not as large as some of the companies you guys represent here. It's relatively easy.
Right. It's super helpful to break the cycle of project funding. And what I've found is the mechanism I've used to do that is that fundamental articulation of, well, what exactly do we do? And how valuable are each of those things? What are the opportunities that we're going after? And what's that worth in terms of permanent funding? Kind of getting that 80% sort of earmarked toward these products that are fundamental to the operation of this business. We're in retail. We will always do inventory management. We should have an inventory management team. We shouldn't do an annual pitch for what are next year's inventory management projects. Breaking that cycle goes hand in hand, in my experience, with breaking out of the silos and spaghetti, because then you can commit a team to become a subject matter expert in a silo that matters to the customer, not necessarily a silo that matters to some internal org. And then the funding mechanism becomes a periodic discussion about, do we still feel like we're getting an acceptable return on investment in that individual product? And that ROI discussion is different based on the nature of the product. If the product is designed to attract more customers, you can measure, is it succeeding at attracting more customers? If it's designed to just always be able to take orders, that's more like the availability question than it is about the conversion question. But being able to articulate your investment portfolio in terms of what does the business do versus what do folks want to do next year, that's, I think, a fundamentally helpful shift.
Yeah, and I think I've seen the shift from, the annual cycle to more of, monthly, quarterly, depending on the change of the product or, the location that you're in. So we're looking at financials on a much more frequent basis. And if there's an opportunity to pivot based on the return, then we have the ability to go and make that case or have a conversation about it. So, the financial discipline is as much part of the leadership and being able to speak to it, but speak to it in terms of a language, I think, Paul, you mentioned, that the business would understand. Take out the techno terms and speak in terms of the business. If we do X, we can generate Y in 3 months.
One other ingredient that, it seems so mundane, and it might be just obvious to everyone, it's been a real eye-opener to me, and it's really CEO and CFO friendly, is to have more contingent budget. So to go into each operating cycle, whatever the planning unit is. And most companies that I've worked for in my life would fully allocate the budget, except for some real risk contingency that was never really accessible to the operating team. But having some formal contingency, and at Dix we have a formal contingency and a mechanism for unlocking it. And people find that great. That takes the pressure off of them to feel like they need to advocate heavily for their wants and needs. And as we've got better at releasing that contingency as things come up, because the world around us changes pretty rapidly. That pivot from fully allocated to a healthy contingency and a transparent mechanism, and the genuine belief that people can get it if they need it, that's also very helpful.
Mm-hmm. I'm trying to be mindful of time, so in terms of some final thoughts, as you look to the future, right, what excites you the most in your role? Let's go around the panel one more time. Starting with you, Paul.
What excites me the most, every 6 months or so, I'll go devote 2 or 3 days of my own time to building a new piece of software in the most recent version of one of the accelerated development frameworks. And The reason I do that is I find that if I don't do it, Moore's law is at such a steep part of its curve that the conceptual compression that is available to technology folks these days, I would quickly lose touch with the exponential change of that. So the things that any competent software engineer can do now, they'll be able to do about 10 to 18x 6 months from now because of the way the machine is currently working. And that reality excites me more than anything else, because I'm not aware of anything else where you can expect that the same resources that you have right now can be fundamentally, dramatically more productive 6 or 12 months from now because of the work that's going on in the universe around us. And that's what inspires me to make sure that the company's not getting in the way of letting people do that.
Excellent. Yeah.
That's great. So I think what excites me more than anything, a lot of companies are going through transformation, and it's the ability, working in technology, that companies are really starting to invest. There's a view of becoming a tech-first company, and in an insurance company, how do you do that? And so there's a lot of talk. The conversations are very different, and the opportunity to lead in a different way, you're empowered to make the change and to bring people along. And so I'm starting to see people not fear the change, but be part of the change and wanting to learn new skills and be part of the future. So I think it's a great place to be, and it's really, I think, up to all of us to make it happen.
All right, Craig, I should look to the industry.
Couple of great answers. And so obviously, while I'm not leading a technology transformation, what I am looking forward to and being a part of Korn Ferry to address is just helping organizations address and tackle the transformation. Thinking back to the stat I gave a minute ago, about 5 years ago, 40% of CIOs or CTOs reporting to CEOs. Now that number is exceeding 60. That's impressive growth right there. And that's going to continue. And I think it leads us to the discussion, which maybe will be a topic for next year. I honestly believe great technology leadership that can think exponentially, that can kind of adapt, as we talked about the acronym earlier. Future CEO leadership. May not be tomorrow, but it's going to be down the road. It's only a matter of time. When you look at software, commercial orientation, customer experience, product capabilities, and so on, a lot of that in digital is coming back under tech leadership, and so they're merging. So I think, as I look forward to the future, I'm really excited to see how this shakes out.
All right, finally, Eash.
I mean it when I say this. When I go back home, I say I miss work, and that still excites me, that I enjoy what I do. And the little influence you can have on people you work with positively, I think that's the best thing that keeps me awake and excited to do what I do. Will it change? Yeah, I may find something different. I'm one of those guys who want to work for the government someday, make it better.
All right, excellent. I feel that we only just got started, but we're out of time. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking our audience.
Great job.